When we come together in this place, it should be to help the people of our Confederation. We meet to scrutinize each other's decisions, our policies, our actions, and the use of money that the people we represent have earned. In my time in office, I have watched the power of this place be willfully abdicated to men who seek their own enrichment, affirm their vanity, or hide their incompetence and ignorance. I have watched them lean on those here with honeyed words, promises of riches or position, or if that fails, threats. I've watched many here lose the sense of gravity of the power bestowed upon us by the people we represent. We must put our people first, all of them, regardless of political affiliation, ability to curry favor, or religious belief. We must be radically compassionate, radically selfless, and radically courageous. I have watched those we represent lose faith, or worse, lose an understanding of the power that they hold. And that must end. During this dramatically transitional time in the history of our nation, the choices each of us make from this day forward will determine the power of this place, the unity of our country, and the well-being of our people. And in this place, Mr. Speaker, courage has been lacking. Yesterday's speech from the throne was no different. In the last several years, we've watched our country lose its economic footing. Earlier this year, protests shut down Canada's rail systems. I have watched the people I represent fall into despair as their primary industry came under attack. And then I've watched thousands of Canadians lose their lives and millions more lose their jobs, their mental health, their homes, and their families due to the collective failure of those on the government side of the House to have the courage to challenge power, to question the status quo, and to acquiesce to a man who has long ago lost the moral authority to govern. This year, after the rail blockades, with the reports of a new infectious disease emerging in China, this man was comfortable telling Canadians that there was no person-to-person transmission of the spread of COVID-19. His MPs, they nodded and clapped. The result was Canadians losing their lives and their jobs. He had no compunction telling Canadians that border control measures and masks didn't work, and his MPs nodded and clapped. The result was Canadians losing their lives and their jobs. He sent critical supplies of personal protective equipment to China when we had a shortage. His MPs nodded and clapped. The result was Canadians losing their lives and their jobs, and he allowed for the shuttering of the federal early warning system for public health dangers. He failed to develop a process that would allow for the full but timely review of rapid and at-home tests for the novel coronavirus, and his MPs have not pressed this issue. They haven't pressed this issue. And the result has been Canadians losing their lives and their jobs. And he has not been transparent about his plans for the procurement and distribution of a potential vaccine for the COVID-19 virus. And while he was doing this, he was awarding contracts to a charity run by two guys that gave his family members hundreds of thousands of dollars in celebrity appearance fees, and who did, you should watch this, Mr. Speaker, this super woke video on MTV Cribs, which showcased their charity as a cultish mess of celebrity appropriation of African culture of the worst order. It is no doubt this contributed to his inability to secure a seat on the UN Security Council, because the picture the international community now has of him is as a dilettantish practitioner of blackface. So when my colleagues were able to compel documents related to this scandal, even though he had shuttered Parliament, he went one step further and prorogued this place. That is, fully shut it down in order to prevent the rest of Parliament from questioning him. He also lost his finance minister under a cloud of scandal, and that was 5 weeks ago. During that time, Canada has lost more lives, more jobs, and wobbled listlessly as the world around us changes and becomes more unstable. His fig leaf for this action was to provide a new vision for the country, a plan, but he did not deliver. His throne speech took no responsibility for the failures he made in preaching wrong information, not just preaching it, but like doubling down on it and dismissing any questioning of the information that he was providing as wrong thought. He took no responsibility for that, and he has no plan and presented no plan to fix these systems that allowed Canadians to be told that there were things like no person-to-person transmission of the virus, that masks shouldn't be worn, and that border controls were racist. There were no plans to move hell and high water to get rapid testing technologies reviewed. There was no mention for the relief for the people in my riding who work in the energy sector. The speech was panned by the AFN National Chief last night. There was no action towards reconciliation. The Liberal Party has promised childcare since 1997, and last night on national television, his minister could not tell Canadians how many spots they proposed to create, in what parts of the country, under what program, by when, and how much it would cost. The same goes for lowering drug costs for Canadians, or a plan for Canadians to have access to the pharmaceuticals that he needs. This was the theme of the entire speech, Mr. Speaker. 5 weeks lost during a pandemic, with an attempt to distract Canadians from scandal, with a bunch of garbage seemingly hastily written on the back of a napkin when a real plan was needed. To say, and on the same day, Mr. Speaker, that this load of something was delivered, that it was reported that there were 301 opioid-related deaths in Alberta between April and June. There was nothing in his speech about how to save the lives of these people. 128 people in Alberta died of COVID-19 during the same period. For this Prime Minister, be it COVID or opioid deaths, he seems to be willing to ignore pandemics when it suits him. For those who are saying that it is too early to question the government's response to the pandemic and economic collapse, and that has been the argument on this side today, I say to them, for those who have lost their lives, who have lost their jobs, and who have lost time as a result of this government's inactions, it is too late. It's already too late. Their inaction has cost them all of these things. It's too late for Sarah Campbell. I cannot believe the public safety minister said that there was a compassionate program to deal with her when she went without her fiancé's companionship during her cancer treatments this year, and they refused to look at her. They refused to have a plan for people who are separated by border closures because the government has failed them. It's too late for my constituent Cheryl, who wrote to me at a loss to express her desperation and her loss of hope in her husband losing his job in the oil sector. It's too late for so many, and the Prime Minister has no plan and only scandal to offer them, but there is hope. Mr. Speaker, I myself had lost a lot of hope after the last election. It was hard for me. The people I represent, they're not in a good spot. Many of them are fighting mental health issues from the loss of work, and they are struggling to make ends meet. They feel isolated and ignored by the people in charge of this nation. I've been trying everything that I can do with the courage inside me to fight for them, to get for change that would allow them to see themselves in a prosperous, peaceful future Canada. Enter the Member of Parliament from Durham, the new leader of Canada's official opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada. In a few short weeks, even as he battled the coronavirus himself, as the new leader of our party, he has given me a boost of hope that I needed, not just as a Member of Parliament, but as a member of a community who's struggling, as a wife apart from her husband, and as a powerful woman who won't back down to anyone. He has done something that is vitally important to me personally, publicly expressed firm support for the human rights of all Canadians, including a commitment to fight discrimination faced by the LGBTQ community and work to protect and enhance women's rights without apology or hesitation. I have no confidence in this government, but especially not in the current Prime Minister, but I do have confidence in that man and this team and in the millions of Canadians who have had enough and are about to stand up for change. In the coming weeks, in the coming months, you will see this team put forward an alternative plan, an alternative vision to this incompetence, this lack of courage, and this lack of compassion. And as Shadow Minister for Health, I will be holding the government to account for their failures. There will be no quarter, and there will be no apologies, but there will be hope. And I ask every Canadian to stand with me, to join our fight in building a new vision for Canada. Giddy up.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her intervention today. She said towards the end of her speech that she thought that members of this side of the House were suggesting that it was too early to start questioning the government's response. But I would actually argue that I don't think it's too early at all. I think that this is an extremely appropriate time to start looking at the response and how successful it's been. The reality of the situation is, Mr. Speaker, millions of Canadians have been receiving the CERB benefit, which has helped them in their time of need and indeed help our economy sustain what we could of it, so that when we do come out of this on the other side, we'll be so much better prepared. 106,000 businesses, Mr. Speaker, small businesses have received support. Employees, almost 1 million employees through the wage subsidy program. Does the member not see that despite the difficult times that we're in, millions of Canadians have been assisted and have been helped with the plans that the government has rolled out over the last several months?
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
I've heard a lot of myopic, elitist, vacuous responses in my time in the House, but I think that one takes the cake. There's no Canadian who wants a continued handout from this government. They want a response to the pandemic so they can get their jobs back, their businesses back, so Sarah Campbell can see her fiancé, so that they can have Christmas dinners. They don't want to be dependent on the Prime Minister and his scandals. They don't want to keep spending billions of dollars. They want the dignity of work. They want their lives back, and they have failed.
Questions and comments, the honourable member for Jonquière. Microphone? Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate my colleague on her speech. There's something that piqued my curiosity at the beginning of her speech. She talked about how unified the country is or the unity of the country, and I'm often under the impression often that for the Conservatives, it's just funding for the oil sector that leads to unity. I never hear them talk about any specific sectors, for example, aluminum or forestry. It's like our economic sectors don't matter. I'd like to know, does she think that it's funding for the oil sector that matters?
I'd like to remind my colleague that the energy sector funds a lot of things in his neck of the woods. So maybe he should be concerned with that and the loss of jobs and the loss of revenue. Maybe he should have some compassion for the people who have provided this wealth and revenue instead of making it a political wedge in this place. I'm tired of this. If we're going to have a unified country, we have to stand up for every region of this country, be it Quebec or be it Calgary Nose Hill. What we saw yesterday was a load of nothing to deflect from the fact that the Prime Minister needed to prorogue Parliament so we wouldn't get the documents about his family's celebrity gigs with the charity that he gave $900 million to. Come on! This has to stop, and we have to do better. And it starts by rejecting what this government put forward yesterday.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the member for Calgary Nose Hill has a new critic portfolio, but I want to take this opportunity to thank her for her work on industry and for all of Industry Committee with regards to protection of fraud. And I'd like her comments about the fact, though, she did excellent work there. The whole committee did excellent work, but with prorogation, we actually lost that work, and it's costing Canadians who are being taken advantage of during fraud during COVID-19. And I'd also like to ask her real quickly with regards to the thoughts of the Liberal plan of connecting Canadians by 2030. The speech from the throne had a reference about speeding that up. I don't know what it means in terms of 2030, whether it's 2029, but the fact of the matter is broadband is still lacking in many parts of this country, and I'd like your comments on that.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I did enjoy the collegial and productive relationship I enjoyed on Industry Committee with the member, and I certainly hope that my colleague from Edmonton Centre, who will be taking over that role, will have the same relationship. I will say this. What he did with the fraud report was so vital. It's been delayed for so long. I certainly hope Industry Committee will bring that forward and the government will act on recommendations put forward by the committee. And to say that Canadians in rural, Mr. Speaker, earlier today the Speaker said that he expected members to be able to plug into internet. That doesn't happen if you're on reserve or you're in rural Canada. We can't wait till 2030 to have a connected country. This should have been done years ago. Our party has called upon the government to do that within 18 months. They're losing time. They just lost 5 weeks, and there was no mention in the speech from the throne for this vital infrastructure. I congratulate my colleague for his work, and I ask us in this place to continue to work together on these issues.